"Oh, hey, Peter," Joe said. "Hey, guys, how are you doing?" he asked. "Good," both Cleveland and Joe said. "Peter, what are you doing here?" Jerome asked with a mad expression. "Look, I just want to say that I'm sorry about yesterday. Even if I was intoxicated from the booze, I still should have known better than to grab Joe's gun and shot rounds for myself. I'm willing to pay for all the damage I've caused," Peter said, holding out a 1,500 check. I wouldn't say it's entirely your fault. I mean, I shouldn't have pulled out my gun to begin with, and shot random objects at people in front of me as well, Joe said. "Still, I should be more careful," Peter said. "Anyways, can you ever forgive me, Jerome, for what caused to happen to this precious bar?" he asked. Jerome seemed hesitant for a moment before saying, "Okay, I forgive you." Peter then breathed a sigh of relief and thanked Jerome. "By the way, where's Quagmire? I want to apologize to him and tell him that he had every right to call me out. Well, me and Cleveland invited him here, but he was busy with something. We don't know what exactly," said Joe. "Why don't you just sit down and have a beer with us?" "Okay," Peter exclaimed, before sitting down and ordering a beer for himself. The evening then Clams suddenly announced that the $150 billion lottery, to which Peter immediately ran out of the Clam, ran back to his car, and got all of his lottery tickets he brought, ready for this big opportunity. Peter showed his friends, Jerome, and everyone else who also was at the Clam with his lottery tickets. They all cheered for Peter and hoped that he would win. Tom Tucker then popped on TV and was about to pronounce the winning numbers. "Good evening, I'm Tom Tucker. This is just the winning numbers for tonight's draw have been announced. Ready your tickets and watch carefully." Peter had a massive grin on his face and made a sound of pure joy through his shut teeth. "The first number is 5. Peter looked down. All of his tickets in spot 1 had a 5. He immediately grabbed it. "The second number is 45. Peter looked down at the ticket he had and 5, and sure enough, there was a 45. "The third number is 31. Peter looked down and there was a 31. Peter seemed to get more excited, making the sound again. "The fourth number is 53. Peter then looked and there was a 53. Peter then began to shake his legs under the table, likely more excited. "The fifth number is 64. There was a 64 on the ticket, and Peter began to slam his fist on the table, even more excited. And finally, the last winning number is 109. And those are the winning numbers. Congratulations to the winner. You won a very big jackpot," Tom Tucker finished. Peter looked down for the final time, and to his surprise, there was 109 on the ticket. Peter immediately shot up and cheered even more than he did. He got that raise and promotion he had worked earlier that day. Everyone at the Clam congratulated Peter for his excellent win, to which Peter had thanked them. "So, what are you going to do with the money?" Cleveland asked. I may just think I have an idea," Peter said. "Thank you for all the support. I'm going to go home now and give this good news to my family." Before Peter left, everyone cheered for him once again. Peter thanked them all in return, before exiting out the Clam and getting back in his car and driving off. Peter then drove down the road with still a very excited expression on his face. Finally, he made it home. Before getting out of his car, he grabbed a bouquet of roses and chocolates. There was a passenger seat they were sitting. He walked inside and called out, "Family, I'm home." He walked, and of course, everyone was there except Lois, who were at the table eating their dinner. Peter then greeted them and asked how their day was, to which they replied that it was going good. "Where's your mother?" Peter asked. "She's in her room. She strictly told us not to go in," said Chris. Peter seemed a little confused before walking upstairs. He made his way towards the bedroom door, and the sounds of the bed squeaking can be heard, which grabbed Peter's attention. When he finally reached the door, he opened it. "Lois, I'm home." Peter was then cut off as his face, slow and shocked expression was on his face zoomed in, dropping the roses and box of chocolates. It then cut to what Peter was looking at. Lois was lying on her bed, but on top of her was Quagmire with a cast on his leg where Peter had shot him. He was getting it on with Lois. "Oh my God!" Peter shouted, grabbed Lois and Quagmire's attention. They both looked over at Peter with the same shocked expression. "Oh my God, Peter, you're back home from work so early?" Lois asked. "Don't change the subject. Why the hell is Quagmire here?" Peter asked, his voice shaking. "Peter, it's not what it looks like. Glenn was really helping me with, Lois paused, and then Quagmire spoke. "Lois, there's no point in hiding this anymore. He's already caught us." He then turned to face Peter. "Peter," he began, "Lois and I have been sleeping together for the past month while you're at work," he's finished. Peter just sat there in complete disbelief. He was shaking uncontrollably, and his lip was quivering. He just stood there for a good minute before finally beginning to speak. "One of my only friends backstabbing me in the back. How could you? Well, you should have known like this day would happen. And you knew I've been crushing on your wife for so long. And how here we are." Peter then looked at Lois. "And we've been staying together for almost 20 years. How the hell could you do this to me?" he said with his voice breaking. "Peter, what do you expect? I've already told you that you've been a horrible husband to me again. Constantly you make me feel very insecure about my aging. And oh, you also brought me roses and chocolates? Well, that's not enough to satisfy me one bit. Clinton, on the other hand, is actually more attracted to me and thinks my aging is what makes me hotter. Plus, he's getting a lot bigger schlong than yours." That was the last bullet ticked to Peter's heart. He clenched it on his chest. "And if you don't like sleeping with me with your best friend, then you can get out of the house," Lois finished. Peter looked like he was about to burst. His body was still trembling and closing his eyes very tightly. But Peter snapped out of his daze and slowly grew into a smile on his face. "You know what, Lois?" he said. "It's fine. You could be with Quagmire. I'll be out of the house. But before I go, I want to say something." "Go ahead," Lois said. "See, I didn't just buy you the roses. Do you remember when I told you I would get a raise from work? Well, I did. Not only that, I got promoted to assistant manager. And finally, I was going to surprise you when I won the lottery," he said, pulling out his winning ticket. Both Quagmire and Lois dropped their jaws. "That's right, unattractive fat ass is rich. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll be packing my stuff and leaving. Oh, and I'm taking the kids with me." "Oh, no you don't," Lois shouted. Lois then pulled one of the drawers from the nightstand and pulled out a large pocket knife and lunged at Peter. Lois pushed Peter against the wall, breaking it on impact. Lois tried to stab Peter, but he grabbed her by the neck at the time, and of course, Peter then pushed Lois off of him as he was about to make his way to the door. Lois immediately got up and tackled Peter, pinning him to the floor. As she started to swipe at Peter's arm, he groaned in pain. She reached over to the lottery ticket that was in the same hand, but Peter, without any hesitation, punched her in the face, knocking her to the floor with a black eye. She was about to get up when Peter got on top of her and placed his hands on her neck. She struggled to free herself from his grasp. "Get off of her, you bastard!" Quagmire shouted. He got on Peter's back and pulled out a syringe with some clear fluid, likely anesthesia, and jammed it into Peter's neck and ejected. Peter got dizzy a bit before collapsing onto the floor, completely knocked out. Lois pushed his hands away and gasped for air. She then smiled and took on Peter's lottery ticket and gave a gentle kiss on the lips. "Thanks, fat ass," she said. Lois then heard the sound of footsteps. "Damn it, kids! Glenn, quickly hide in the bedroom," she said. Quagmire did what he was told and hid in the bathroom, closing the door behind him. Lois did hide the knife under the bed. She grabbed a nearby water bottle and poured water in her eyes to make it look like she were crying. Brian and the others walked in the room, likely from the sounds of Peter and Lois fighting. "Lois, is everything okay? We heard a lot of yelling and banging," said Brian. Lois then turned around to face Brian with fake tears from the water she poured. "Peter, he tried to kill me. I don't know why, but thankfully I was able to knock him out for a couple of scratches and a few punches to the gut," she acted. "Oh my God, look what he did to your eye," Brian exclaimed, noticing Lois's black eye. "Brian, please don't call the police," she said. Brian nodded and, of course, pulled out his cell phone, calling for Joe. "Joe, you need to get over here. Peter's gone crazy," he said. "I'm on my way," Joe replied. The scene then cuts to Joe wheeling out of his chair and into the Griffin house, and of course he knocked on the door. Meg opened the door to let him in. Chris and Brian lifted Peter's unconscious body down the stairs with Stewie and Lois following behind. They gently placed Peter on the floor, completely exhausted by carrying Peter's excessive weight. "So what's going on?" Joe asked. "Well," Lois began, "Peter came into my bedroom and showed me the winning lottery ticket and said that he didn't want anything to do with me or the kids. He even told me he wanted to kill me and the children because of how much of a nuisance we were to him. So pretty much at this point, that's when he got on top of me and beat me senseless and even tried to strangle me. But I was able to fight back and knocked him out with a couple of scratches to the arm and a few punches to the gut," she finished. Everyone in the room shut their eyes and in complete shock. "Oh my God, that's the idea Peter was talking about? I was there. He would have won the lottery. He came to the clam. He told me what the others about his promotion of work and the lottery ticket he bought. We all cheered on him for the winning numbers he announced at 1. Cleveland asked him what he was going to do with the money, and Peter said that he may just have an idea before leaving the clam. And it looks like I finally know what that sick bastard." Lois then nodded her head in agreement. "Exactly, Joe. There is no need for court today. Peter's finally completely guilty. Please, just take him somewhere where he'll never be near me and the kids again," she finally said. "That's okay with me, Lois. He'll be going to prison for a long time. And since Peter wanted to use that money for evil, you're welcome to keep that money," Joe said. "Thank you, Joe," she said. Joe pulled out his phone and dialed for the police crew. The scene panned out for the house and showed a police car heading towards the house. The car then parked in front of the house, and 2 officers walked out. Joe let them in and explained what happened, and 2 officers nodded their heads and lifted Peter up, who was still unconscious, and carried him to the car and threw him in the back. Joe had thanked the officers before they drove away. "Have a good, rich life, everyone," said Joe. "Thanks again, Joe," Lois said. "You're very welcome," Joe replied, before going back inside his house. Lois told the others to get back inside and into bed, to which everyone did. Once everyone else was in their respective bedrooms, Lois went to her bedroom and shut the door behind her. "Glenn, it's okay to come out now," she whispered through the door. Quagmire exited out of the room to be with Lois, smiling at him. "Peter's gone for now. Joe and his crew are going to lock him up and make sure he doesn't come anywhere near us," she said. "Oh, thank God," he said. "Yeah, but you know what the best part is?" she said, before walking over to the bed, pulling out the stick underneath. "This money will be ours," she said, snickering. "All right!" Quagmire exclaimed, as he and Lois went to the bedroom and continued on with their play. The scene then faded out for the 3rd time. It faded into the Quahog police station with an early morning sky outside. The scene then panned out to show various jail cells before stopping with the cell with Peter in it. Peter was unconscious for a couple of seconds as he stirred awake. "Oh, my head," he groaned. "Where am I?" he thought. Peter blinked before he finally realizing he was in a jail cell. "What the hell? Why am I here?" he exclaimed. Joe in his cop uniform could be seen wheeling away to Peter's call. Awake, eh?" Joe asked, smirking. Peter just turned to face Joe. "Joe, what the hell is going on? Why am I here?" he said. "Oh, you know why, Peter," Joe responded. No, I don't. I really don't. Please, do you know why I'm here?" Peter asked, this time very agitated. "Wow, you really just don't know. Guess Lois really knocked you out good. It's either that, or you're just being yourself," Joe said. "Joe, I seriously don't know why I'm here. Please tell me," Peter exclaimed. Joe sighed before saying, "Lois told me everything." "Told you what? What are you even talking about?" Peter asked. "She told me on how you wanted to kill her after knowing you won the lottery, and how you wanted to kill the children as well because they're all a nuisance to you," Joe said. "What? No, that's not what happened, I swear," Peter said, sounding as if he was on the verge of a mental breakdown. "I don't want to hear it, Peter. You know Quagmire was right about you being an idiot, but you're also a psychopath. Out of all the stupidest things you could have ever done, this one really crossed the line. I believe Lois 100% on this one. Her black eye and the tears and the abuse of your children are solid proof to me. Oh, and all that money you won will now be under Lois's name. And I spoke to the warden and agreed not only that, but have you locked up in here for prison for life. Joe finally finished. Peter's eyes widened at what Joe just told him. But Joe, that's not... Peter was cut off by Joe. Sir, you have the right to remain silent, he barked. This instantly silenced Peter, as he remained completely silent. Good, now you wait here until the bugs get here to transfer you to prison, Joe said, before wheeling away. Peter once again closed his eyes tightly out of anger, and closed his hands shut into his fists, punched a hole in the wall out of pure frustration. Stupid bitch got me arrested, he grunted, grabbing now a bloodied hand and a couple of scars it had. The scene then panned back to the Griffin house. Meg, Stewie, Chris, and Brian all made their way downstairs to the kitchen. Morning, family, Lois exclaimed, popping open a bottle of champagne. Someone's in a good mood, Brian said, sitting at the table along with the others to eat their breakfast, which was already on the table. Of course I am, Brian. We're rich, Lois replied, pouring herself a glass. Everyone cheered in excitement at the exciting news. So, what are you going to do with the money? Brian asked. Well, first of all, I'm going to pay off the mortgage for this house. Then I'm going to sell this house and buy a mansion for ourselves. Afterwards, I'm going to buy ourselves a new car. And finally, I'm going to buy ourselves a private yacht. And also, I'm definitely going to go shop for designer clothes. Everyone cheered for Lois. Hey, Mom, is it okay if we use some of that money for my college? Meg asked. Lois burst out laughing. She continued to laugh for a good minute before finally calming herself down. Oh, you're serious, she said. Meg, honey, you don't need college. We're rich, for crying out loud. But it's always my dream to go to college after high school, said Meg. Meg, we're rich. There's no need for college. You'll be living a very good life without struggles for money, Lois replied. Mom, please, Meg pleaded. Meg, I said no and that's final, Lois snapped. Meg just sighed and finished up her breakfast. She and Chris then finished off and walked out of the house and for school. Brian walked up to Lois, placing a dish in his sink. Hey, may not be a good time to say this, but will you ever need a new mate? I'm always available to talk to, Brian said, smiling. But of course Lois looked at him disgustingly. Brian, you're not my type, she responded. Brian hung his head in disappointment as he walked into the living room. Lois then looked out of the house and into the car, lottery ticket in hand, and with an excited look on her face, she drove down to the small building that had a billboard with the top words, Quahog Lottery. Lois then parked the car and walked inside, still looking very excited. The exterior of the lobby was very identical to that of an extraordinary bank, along with a square counter with the center field with men, and on the white button-up shirts or women with business suits or skirts. Lois quickly ran to the counter, all excited. Hey, I would like to cash in my winning lottery ticket, please. That's right, I'm the lucky winner, she snickered, handing out the ticket. The young brunette, with a bun on her head, with a black business suit and glasses, turned around to face Lois and grabbed the ticket before proceeding to get up to her seat, walked over to one of the nearest drawers that was behind her, and pulled out a huge black duffel bag filled to the brim with $100 bills in stacks before handing it to Lois and saying, Congratulations. Lois immediately grabbed the bag and sped all the way back to her car. She got in and threw the bag over her shoulder and into the back seat. She then pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. She opened the pack and opened one of the cigarettes before getting it up the lighter. She then placed now the cigarette on her lap, blowing more smoke out. She was then proceeded to shove the burned part of it into her arm while moaning, Ah yeah, I'm rich, baby! Then the scene slowly transitioned to a montage of both Lois and Peter. The first clip was Peter being excited out of the police station with two guards while he had his hands cuffed behind his back, and two of the guards throwing him into Quahog's prison bus. But that scene has been seen several times before. The next clip was of Lois throwing her money outside in the air of the house while Brian, Stewie, Meg, and Chris moved a truck full of boxes into the yard. The following clip was of Peter getting his orange prisoner outfit while being followed by a guardian with a baton and into the prison cell. After the clip was finished, it was of Lois buying a white convertible and selling the old red car to some car salesman. The next clip was one of Peter, now wearing the prison suit, at the prison's cafeteria, being served some grayish browny gooey stuff in the tray, which made him cringe just looking at it. The top part of the clip for Lois was her buying a massive yacht that was at least 50 feet tall, and an old guy with a captain uniform was following. A clip for Peter was him in the shower along with other prison mates, a majority of them looking very buff. 3 of the inmates walked up to Peter and began to do unspeakable feints to him. The following clip was of Lois with the others and her new mansion that was located in the river of the yacht beside it. Unloading box after box, Lois was now wearing a fancy white dress with white heels to match, did a small twirl in the center of the living room while laughing to herself. The 2 final clips were for Peter had made his cell, when of course he was receiving a letter from a guard, and this scene had been placed over to what was in the letter. It stated the following: Dear Mr. Griffin, I have heard about your very recent allegations about domestic violence, and as a company, I don't condone such actions. As a result, you not only have lost your raise as a promotion, but you are completely terminated from the company. Thank you for your amazing work at the Puckschwit, but I can't have an individual working for my company. Sincerely, Preston Lloyd. Peter crumpled up the letter out in his hand in frustration. The next scene was going to Peter looking out the small window and looking at the night sky outside before proceeding to shed a few tears. After the montage of the scene, it slowly transitioned to Brian in the kitchen mansion, typing away on his laptop, where Lois was wearing red glasses and wearing the same white heels like before, having some dark red eyeliner to match diamond earrings. Walked into the kitchen while rubbing his lipstick on her lips. Brian, I'm going on a date with Glenn. I'm going to need you to look after the children while I'm gone, she said, putting a small mirror and flipping it open. I can't, I'm working on this book, Brian said. Lois looked at Brian with a sense of frustration. Brian, I'm not giving you an option. It's either going to look after the children while I'm gone, she hissed. No, Brian said. Lois then walked up to Brian without warning, grabbed his laptop, and threw it against it, breaking on impact. What the hell? Brian yelled. I told you that I'm not giving you an option. Now you either look after the kids, or I swear to God, I'll take you to the vet and have you put you down for being a good-for-nothing dog, Lois threatened. Lois, Jesus, fine, Brian scoffed. Good, Lois replied softly. There was a knock at the door. Lois groaned, walked over, and then answered it. It was her parents. Lois seemed rather annoyed to see them at the door. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. What are you 2 doing here? She said, and very bluntly, we heard you had won the $1 million lottery, and we heavily congratulate you, Barbara said, before Carter butted in. Yes, and we are wondering if you're interested in combining your money with my company. I'll give it all to you as a reward for the biggest accomplishment. Thanks, but no thanks, said Lois. In fact, I don't want anything to do with you, especially you, Dad. You barely were ever there for me when I was a kid. I know I should still visit the 2 of you from time to time, but now that I have won big and I have my own life, I never ever want to see your faces again. Unless you want me to file a restraining order for the 2 of you, I highly recommend you 2 leave now, Lois demanded. Both Carter and Babs just hung their heads, and they made their way back to the car. Once they drove off, Lois proceeded to walk to her new convertible and drove off as well, likely to see Glenn for their date. The scene then cuts back to the outside of the prison, with the nighttime outside view, before cutting to Peter in his cell, sitting in the small prison bed, with his fist on the chin, and then he hangs his head. Peter then reached down to his pocket and pulled out his folded photo. He unfolded it to reveal there was a picture of him, Lois, and the others outside of their house, smiling and hugging each other. A tear rolled down Peter's face as a tear dropped onto the photo. Rolling down it as well, Peter began to softly sob while the scene zoomed out of his cell, before fading once again. The then scene went to black, and it showed the outside of the mansion, and another daytime scene right before the view cutting to the living room. Brian could be seen walking to the front door, but before he did, he called out to Lois, who was sitting on the big white couch in the living room, trying some expensive-looking makeup, telling her that she was gonna go visit Peter in prison, to which Lois seemed to be okay with. Brian got his gray Prius and drove down Cold Hog's prison. Brian then seen the parked his car and then made his way inside. He walked up to an officer that was standing behind the counter, filling out some paperwork. The officer then looked up to see Brian. "May I help you?" the officer asked. "I would like to see Peter Griffin," said Brian. "Follow me," the officer said. Brian then followed the officer down the hall. Before the scene cuts back to Peter in his cell. Still looking downward, then the other officer walked up to his cell. "Griffin, you have a visitor," he said. Peter then looked up with a bit of a surprised look on his face as he immediately stood up and followed the guard. The scene then cuts to once again, this time in the visiting room, cutting to Peter being brought to a guard while visiting the window. Brian then walked up to the other side of the window. "Brian?" Peter asked as he grabbed the telephone while Brian did the same. "How are you holding up?" Brian asked. "I've had better days," Peter said. "How are you and everyone else doing?" he asked. "Good, I'm actually more than good. Lois is actually rich now from the money you made, bought us a big mansion, yacht, and all the stuff he likes." Peter then slams his fist on the counter. They're in anger. "Serves you right for trying to kill her," said Brian. "I didn't try to kill her. She tried to kill me," Peter responded. "Peter, I know you too well. You often let yourself very crazy antics that are just harmful to those around you, including your own family. I believe Lois in 100% on this. Brian, I didn't really try to kill her. I swear to God. I think I'm going to head out now." Peter hung his head in defeat, but after about 5 seconds, he shot his head back up as if something had hit him. "My God, why didn't I think of this sooner? Brian, wait!" Brian was about to leave the door halfway. Peter said that he turned around and was confused. "Look, you remember the security room when we were burglared, right? The panic room." Brian nodded, still looking confused. "Go back to the house and check the surveillance camera. And of course, you'll see that I'm not lying. Peter, Lois sold the house. She bought us a mansion." "Well, we'll try to find your way in and you'll see," Peter said, as he looked as he was about to full on have a mental breakdown. Brian looked still skeptical, but Peter shed a tear. That's when Brian finally decides to take pity on him. "Now that I think of it, I think I do happen to have an extra key in the house on my Prius. Right, I'll go back and check, and I'll see if you're not lying." Peter then thanked Brian repeatedly before the guard said time was up and took Peter away. The next scene then cuts back to Brian, going back to his Prius and making his way to the old house. When he had arrived, he parked his car before heading out. He walked over to the passenger side and opened the glove box to reveal what indeed had an extra key in the house. He made his way over to the front door, but before entering, he knocked on it, likely to make sure no one else was living there. After about a while, he unlocked the door with a key and slowly opened it. "Hello?" he called out, but thankfully there was no response. The entire living room was completely empty. The same could be said with the kitchen, dining room, and just about everywhere else. Brian made his way up the stairs and completely stopped at the attic door just above him. He jumped to try and reach to grab it, but he couldn't due to how short he was. There was thankfully a stool that he'd likely have the key left behind when they moved out, so Brian got the stool. The stool was on and successful for reaching the attic door. As the wooden ladder dropped down to the floor, Brian set the stool to the side and he made his way up. Brian found the panic room and walked inside. All the monitors were off, but when Brian found a remote control, he clicked on one of the buttons. They were working fine. Brian then scrolled through the surveillance in time to see that Peter was arrested, and there lay the truth in front of him. Peter was walking into Lois and Quagmire. Peter showing off his lottery ticket. Lois was trying to kill Peter with a knife. Glenn was injecting Peter and knocking him out, and Lois was stealing the ticket. Brian's jaw dropped at what he saw. "Oh my God," he whispered. Brian pulled out his cell phone and began to record what had soon to be Lois and Glenn's karma. Of course, Brian put his cell phone back in his dog pocket, ran down the attic and stairs, and back into his Prius. Brian made his way to the police station, and then he rushed inside, greeted with Joe and behind his desk. Of course, looking for some flies. But, however, he then saw Brian rushing towards his desk. "Oh, hey, Brian, how's rich life going?" he said. "It's going okay. I need you to see something very important," said Brian. Brian pulled out his cell phone and showed him the true motives of Lois Griffin. Oh my god, those two are definitely going at it for a long time? Do you know where they are now? Oh, Joe asked. Before Brian could say anything, the phone buzzed. Brian's hand, he flipped the phone to see it was a message from Lois. Brian, I'm at Glenn's house and he'll be moving in with us. I don't care if you two have beef. Please keep an eye on the children while I'm gone. Brian then showed the text to Joe and then smiled. Alright, let me call for a little backup, Joe said, grabbing the gray telephone that was on his desk. The scene then slowly transitioned to the outside of the Quagmire's house before cutting to the Quagmire and Lois carrying some boxes around. I can't believe I'll be finally moving in with you in the mansion. What a dream come true, Quagmire said, loading some boxes into a box. Yeah, but you know what's the best part is? We're rich, so we can have plenty of time to ourselves without need of going to work, Lois replied. Quagmire and Lois stopped what they were doing to reach over to each other. They both placed their arms around each other's shoulders, and they were leaning in for a kiss. But just as their lips were about an inch away, the front door burst open to reveal Joe and his two officers from before when Peter was arrested, guns in hand, aiming at the two. Both of you, go on the ground, now, Joe demanded. The two officers ran up and pinned the both of them to the floor, before proceeding to cuff them both. Joe, what is going on? What the hell? Lois said, with a hint of anger in her voice. What you two did, framing Peter and stealing his lottery ticket for your desires, Joe responded. Both Lois and Glenn's eyes widened. But how did you... But before Lois could finish her sentence, Brian, along with Peter, now wearing his usual attire, walking into the door with smirks on their faces. While Brian was holding up his phone, showing the recording he took, Lois was shocked to see Peter, but when she faced Brian, her face was filled up with rage. You bastard! Where did you even get that from? When I visit Peter in prison, he reminded me of the surveillance he requested me to check them out, telling me the whole story. Damn it! Forgot about the panic room! Take them away, Joe demanded, and then the other officers did so, while Lois and Quagmire just struggled to get free and pleaded Peter and Brian to tell them what they just showed was a joke. Alright, you, Peter, and Brian, and the others will be scheduled to court so that Lois and Quagmire can be judged, and is also cleared to your names and actions, Joe said, to which Brian and Peter nodded in agreement. In the entrance scene once again, it slowly transitioned to a courtroom filled with people. Chris, Meg, and Stewie were sitting in the front seats, while Peter and Brian and Joe were sitting at one of the tables in the podium. Lois and Quagmire can be seen brought in by two officers from them before, still trying to free themselves from the grasp, and being sat down by the table was the opposite from Peter, Brian, and Joe's after the judge did the same from the episode, A Shot in the Dark, banged his gavel, and the sound blocked that the court was officially in sentence. To give a quick rundown, Joe told everything that Brian had showed him, and when Brian showed him the judge of his recording of Lois and Quagmire framing Peter, stealing his lottery ticket, and after all was said and done, the judge sentenced Lois and Quagmire to a life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not only that, the mansion, the car, yacht that Lois is now will be in Peter's name, and they will be doing a community service to pay off the rest of that lottery ticket that Lois spent on, and Peter will be cleared from any crimes. The judge then banged his gavel once again, signaling the sentence was final, and Lois and Quagmire were taken away, pleading Brian and Peter to tell them they were innocent before being out of the sight. Meg, Chris, and Stewie ran up to Peter and embraced him for a hug. Peter then said that he loved them very much, that moving forward, he'll be able to be a much better father than how he was before, and this is what he meant for all this. The scene that panned out before going to black screen for the 5th time. The scene then slowly transitioned to another montage, this time of Peter and the others enjoying rich life. One showed seeing Peter taking the kids, Brian and Joe, out for dinner at a very fancy-looking restaurant. They were eating various gourmet meals and desserts while laughing at all the while. The next scene showed Peter being offered his old job back from Preston, but Peter denied the request, likely because since he was rich. The next couple of scenes where Peter is spending quality time with his kids at the yacht, and the swimming pool was built from the backyard, sports and alike. The scenes that were played out were very wholesome, featuring the kids and their future lives. The first scene showed Meg graduating high school, while everyone cheered, but Peter and the others were the ones who looked more excited for her. The next scene then showed off Peter handing Meg a paper, to which it was a college acceptance letter that Peter had likely paid off for her. Meg then gave Peter a big hug, to which Peter hugged her back. For the next couple of scenes of where Meg was making some new very nice friends, and likely had a very nice blonde guy that wasn't Jace. The montage then showed the two going on various dates, as well as a huge college projects together. The next clip showed the two graduating with a very high degree, and the final clip was the two of them looking much older and having very two young children, both being a boy and a girl, and they even kissed each other too. Who at this time. But of course, that was the upper part for Meg. The montage for Chris was of him going back to school, not being pestered by Jace or his friends. The clip showed him doing all basic high school work until he graduated as well. He goes off to college to become a police officer, which he does after excessive training. Yes, this just like from the episode Future Stewie, but no, you're not entirely wrong. He does get married, not to mention some foul-mouthed woman, but also a very nice girl, who is blonde, and they also had kids. The montage for Stewie was of him getting into his regular preschool to kindergarten to elementary and middle school before graduating himself and getting a job as an intern for an accountant. And of course there was a montage of Brian. He said he won a gold ticket to a professional, and surprisingly, it really was. It was being read by many people, even professional writers, and he even got a lot of fame for it. He even had his own meet and greet, signing autographs to his fans, and he even got his own show at the host at the Quahog's Feeder. He was then on top of the world, but as fate would have it, he passed away due to dog years, and his grave was behind the mansion's backyard. With Peter and the others looking down, tears in their eyes and tissues in their hands, Stewie placed the red rose in front of the grave before he and the others drifted off. Once the montage had concluded, the scene slowly transitions to the mansion, with nighttime outside while the party lights could be seen, shining in the background. The scene then cuts to how old Peter and his old, now grown-up kids, along with Joe and Cleveland, who were also old, and other similar faces such as Jerome, Mort Goldman, Bonnie, Kevin, and Susie Swanson, and many others. And also looking decades older, they were even having a huge party. Disco lights, DJ music, dance floors, and like Carter and Barbara were also there, looking a bit sentimental than usual. They both walked up to Peter and congratulated him, and even apologized at the fact that they hated him back then, and now they would likely have not suspected that Lois could be worse than him, and then considered him as a son that they never had, to which Peter had forgave and thanked the two. Everyone gathered around near Brian's grave, and now that it was a big statue of him, it took it behind a family photo. After the family photo was taken, the scene that showed the black background with the words, "My family 20 years later," Peter Griffin at the bottom right of it. The scene then faded to black, and the final time, it showed the end credits, and that was the end of the episode. And that was how Family Guy was supposed to end. A really good episode, and perfect way to end the series. The amount of drama, love that Seth had put into this episode is amazing. I know he made other episodes with love and emotion, but this one is the really episode that takes the cake. This episode also had character development for Meg, Chris, and more importantly, Peter. Meg finally gets the pity of all the crap she's been through. Both Chris and Peter have both taken it from her also. But of course, this episode answered a question that I'm sure a lot of you Family Guy fans have been wondering for a long time. Who is the worst parent along with Peter and Lois? And the results were somewhat surprising. But also, finally, to put this story to a close, I'm sure we can all agree that this is far better than the Family Guy we know.